Hi guys. So yesterday I posted an embarrassing and difficult lesson. If you look for it, the video is called Don't Lose Your Head. And what I did in that game was that I launched an attack without first making sure that my own king was safe. My opponent didn't respond to my attack, but instead launched a counter-attack that was deadly, and I lost in 4 moves. Okay. Today, I've got a game in which I learned that lesson, and I'm just going to, I'll flip the board. And this is really a lesson in how to time your attack properly. Okay, so I'm playing with the black pieces, and my opponent was rated slightly higher than me, so this is a 30-minute rapid game, and he starts with G3. So clearly his intention is to fianchetto his light squared bishop, probably bring his knight to F3 and then castle kingside. So I reply with D5, so I'm thinking I'm going to do a reverse London system, which is quite often my go-to when my opponent starts with an opening that I don't really know or understand. But I know that with the London system, if I build this little pyramid here, then this light squared bishop is not going to cause me too many issues early on in the game. So he does the fianchetto, I bring out my light squared bishop, which is what you do in the London system, or dark squared bishop in the case of if you're playing white. Then he plays D3, E6, he brings his knight out as expected, I bring my knight out to help defend the E5 square, and then he brings his knight to H4 because my bishop has nowhere to go. So I bring my bishop now to G6 because I'm thinking if he captures, I'll recapture with my H pawn. So bringing my pawn towards the center and opening up a semi-open file for my rook. That's not too much of a problem. I know that I'll be able to castle queenside if need be. Knight takes the bishop and I recapture with the H pawn. So far so good. He then plays B3, probably looking to fianchetto his dark squared bishop on that side as well. So I bring my queen straight out because the queen is now looking at his rook in the corner, and he can't now play his bishop straight to B2 like he wants because I'll just capture the bishop. So he blocks by pushing D4. I push C5, knowing that the pawn can't take. The pawn is really pinned, because if the pawn takes, I can grab that rook. And now he does the fianchetto with his dark square bishop on B2. I castle, and he brings his knight out to A3, so he might be considering now moving his queen and then castling queenside. So I bring my knight to H6, it needs to get into the game, and I'm thinking that the knight maybe can come here to G4. He pushes his queen forward as expected. I bring my knight in. So now if he castles, then he's going to have rooks on D1 and H1, and then my knight can come in with a fork on both rooks. So he pushes his pawn to kick my knight away. My knight comes back to H6. Then he castles queenside. I bring my knight in now to F5. My knight's, if his king's on that side of the board on the queen side, I need to get my knight into the game. It's not going to do anything there on H6. So he then captures the pawn on C5. I don't recapture straight away with the knight, although I could, but instead I try to improve my queen. So my queen is now looking at this slightly awkward knight there on A3. And in case that bishop moves, then I may be able to harass the knight. He moves his king across, and I capture with the pawn with the queen, so now material is equal again. He harasses my knight, and I move it in to E3, where it's now got a fork on the rook and the bishop. So the only way for white to protect both pieces is to move the rook across to G1, And now what we've got is because that's like a forcing move. There was a question on the beginners forum on chess.com. What are forcing moves? And this is an example of a forcing move. So I've played that, which gives me the initiative. And what it's done is it's forced his rook, in order to preserve material, it's forced his rook over there to g1. Now what we've got is a situation where this rook on g1 is tied to the defense of the bishop on g2. The bishop on g2 is pretty much imprisoned at this point in the game by his own light squared pawns here. It also means that the rook on h1 is trapped and playing no part in the game either. So this one knight right now is managing to pin down, hold down 3 of white's pieces, which is pretty cool. I move my rook across to g8 because I might want to move this bishop at some point, and I don't want his bishop to come in and grab my g7 pawn. So that's just a prophylactic move. I'm just gradually, patiently seeking to improve my pieces. It's not time to attack at this point. White's king is pretty secure there in the corner, but my advantage in this game, and the big imbalance in this game, is these 3 pieces of white's that are now tied down in the opposite corner. White then moves his queen forward to d3, and I wasn't quite sure what the point of this move was. One idea is it could be trying to protect this square so that his knight can enter the game and be a bit more active. I move my bishop forward to e7, so I'm connecting my rooks together. This bishop, remember, is still also tied down. If this bishop moves along this diagonal at all, then my queen can come in and grab the knight. So indeed, the knight does come in. So that was the point of white's move. I then now attack the bishop in front of the king, which is generally quite a good idea. When your opponent has this kind of setup, this fianchettoed bishop right in front of the king, the pawns are on the light squares, which means that the dark squares are potential weaknesses. But they are protected by that bishop, okay? So if you can remove that bishop, then the weakened dark squares are still weak. So at this point, I've considered a few times in this game, should I capture the light square bishop with my knight? But generally that's not really a good idea, because I'm thinking this knight is a very strong piece. Where it is right now, it's looking at the c2 square, which is a potential weakness. If the queen ever moves away from the defense of that square, then I've got ideas of bringing my queen in with a convincing attack. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm patiently trying to improve the positions of my pieces. I'm trying to improve my overall range of options on the board. White moves his bishop now to a3, attacking my queen. My queen's going to have to move, but remember, my queen is the only defender of that nice strong knight at this point, so I need to keep my queen on that diagonal, so I just move back to b6. And now white comes in with a check. So this is actually a fork. He's forking my king, which is going to have to move, because I can't capture with the queen because I lose my queen. And this weak pawn on f7 is likely to fall. So I move my king to b8. Now, it was already my intention to move my king to b8. If we go back a couple of moves, so my thinking is, what I want to do is I want to move my king off the semi-open c file. Then I want to move my my rook to c8, where it's looking at this weak square. And actually what white does now helps me to a degree. So he comes in with a fork, I move my king, he captures the pawn, so he's gone a pawn up, and now I can move my rook to c8, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. So now there's a significant threat that I've got two pieces. I've got the knight and the rook looking at the c2 pawn. So white thought therefore over 2 minutes on this move, and he decided he has to defend the pawn. So this rook is now overworked because it was there on g1 defending the bishop, and it has to come in because there's no other piece, no other lower value piece that can defend the pawn. So I think for a bit, and then I grab the bishop. I can't see any reason not to grab it, so I want to keep up the pressure. So I'm now up a piece. White comes in now to with queen to g6. So I have to consider my weaknesses and my strengths at this point. The rooks are connected, so that's not... my back rank is pretty safe, and I can't see anything horrible that this knight can do. It can't really go to D... Well, it can go to d6 because it's defended by the bishop, but now of course this bishop is undefended. The queen is the only defender of the knight. So I then come in. This is the start of the attack. Because his queen has moved away from this area on the king side, I am then able to get my queen onto this long diagonal and threaten checkmate on a1. So I move my queen there, and now he thinks again for another almost 2 minutes. He has to prevent queen a1, which will be checkmate. He can't move his bishop to b2 because I simply come in with my queen, which is protected by the bishop, and that would be checkmate as well. So the only move that is available to him is going to be c3. So he has to push c3. So he's been forced, again, this is another forcing move, he's been forced to weaken his king and open up this light square diagonal. I don't have a light squared bishop, so it's not too critical. I can then come in and grab the pawn with my rook, because my rook is defended by the queen. He comes in, bishop to d6 check. That's not too much of an issue, but I do need to be careful now about any time, so that if his queen can capture my rook, that could be checkmate. So I need to tread carefully at this point. He comes in with an exchange of rooks, which is maybe not ideal, but he thinks it's probably in his favour at this time. But again, now he's in a very desperate situation here, with the queen and the bishop on that diagonal right in front of the king. So he's going to have to do something to protect these two squares. And the solution that he finds, which is, he's starting to look a bit desperate now. These forcing moves have put him into a position where he didn't really want to be. So he puts his knight there on e5. Now that knight is attacked by 3 pieces, so I just come straight in and grab with my bishop. Now my bishop is the piece that would be protecting my queen for her attack on the king with possible checkmating ideas. So I now enable white to swap off that strong bishop, but I'm thinking I'm a piece in front at this point. I've got 2 knights on the board, his king is exposed. As long as I remember to protect my own king, then we should be good. And remember, this rook on h1 has still not moved. It hasn't played any part in the game so far because of that situation that I was able to create by forcing his other rook over to g1 and having those 3 pieces trapped in the corner. So it slowed down white's development, and that has in turn minimized the options that white has had in the game. So let's just think a bit as well about if I'd have captured with the knight here, then white could have captured my bishop anyway, and then if you think my knight is there on e5, the queen is there on f6, he's then got 2 pieces looking at my knight, so I would have lost the knight and the bishop, which is why I chose to capture with the bishop. He recaptures with his bishop, and I recapture with the queen rather than the knight. I'm thinking that, yes, this knight is quite a long way from the enemy king, as is my other knight. However, I'm thinking this knight is covering the b8 square. And if at any time the white queen gets onto my back rank, I need to make sure that my king is protected. So I choose to capture with the queen. Also comes with the threat of capturing e2. White's queen now moves into f7, where it's attacking both my rook, which is undefended, and my knight, which is undefended. So I have a similar move to one we've seen before. Move the rook across, which is one of the attack pieces, to defend the other attacked piece. This is what white did earlier on in the game with the bishop. Now the queen comes into e7, again attacking the rook. I can't afford to lose my rook, so I play queen to f6, which is likely to force an exchange of queens. And I figure if there's an exchange of queens, I'm now 2 pieces up, and I'm 1 pawn down, but I've got a rook, I've got 2 knights. The 2 knights can work together, team up, and attack the enemy king. White decides quite correctly that a trade of queens would not be in his favour at this point. I bring my knight out to b6 with a discovered attack on the queen by the rook. My rook is defended by the queen, so I'm okay there. Queen to b4. Now I move my rook across to c8 onto the completely open c-file. So now I've got ideas of maybe queen to g6 check, and if the king has to move to one of these 2 squares, then I can move my queen from there to here, for example. White plays a4, I come in with a check, king b2, queen c2 check, and he really only has one option at this point. So you can see this is a much more patient kind of attack than my kamikaze game that I played yesterday. I'm really taking my time. I'm wanting to make sure of the win. Now, what I'm thinking is, I have a nice square here for my knight. Because the king has been forced to go to a3, knight to c4 would come with check. However, of course, the pawn can capture at that point, so the king's not in danger. So I'm thinking, okay, how can I build up this attack before I launch it? And the solution I found was moving my other knight in to e3, where it is also looking at now at the c4 square. White moves his rook across to a1. This is the rook's first move of the game, but it's all coming now too late because I've built up. I've now got 4 pieces. All of my pieces on the board are now going to be involved in a checkmating attack. So I bring one of my knights into c4 with check. The king can't move. These squares are covered by the queen. So his only option, he's got 2 options. He can capture with a pawn or he can capture with a queen, but either way he's going to be losing. So pawn captures, then I recapture with my other knight. Again, that comes with check, and white's only option now, his only legal move. The king can't move. All of those squares are covered. So the only option he would have is to capture the attacker with his queen, and that's going to be the end of the game. So here my opponent resigned. So you can see in this game that I was developing attacking ideas, sometimes multiple attacking ideas, and I really am kind of working with this philosophy right now about chess that it's once you get over the beginner level of making horrible blunders when you don't need to, then chess is all about, it's like an arm wrestle, right? It's like wrestling, chessling. You are slowly, sometimes gradually, when there isn't an obvious winning opportunity, you are building up to a winning opportunity. And if you can introduce these forcing moves that make your opponent's board layout and position slightly worse and make yours slightly better, what you get from that is you get more control of the board and more options for your pieces to attack. Fewer options for your opponent's pieces to attack. So really, my opponent was kind of on the back foot throughout all of this game, and what I didn't do is I didn't rush. I didn't try to go in for too quick a kill. And I think that that is really one of the most important kind of psychological lessons for anyone who's an improving player. Build, build, build your position. If it's not time to attack, you don't attack. Attack when the time is right. And if you can't attack, then improve your position. And it really is as simple as that. So hope this has been useful for you. I'll see you next time.